For nearly 4 decades, a maritime mystery unfolded across the Arctic's most punishing waters. A steel-hulled cargo steamer, abandoned by her crew in the frozen reaches of northern Alaska, refused to die. She drifted, unmanned, through some of the most dangerous seas on Earth, spotted dozens of times, yet never reclaimed. While many dismissed the reports as nautical folklore, the sightings kept coming, year after year, decade after decade. This is the true story of the SS Baichimo, the ghost ship of the Arctic. The Baichimo began her life far from the frozen north. Built in 1914 at a shipyard in Gothenburg, Sweden, she was originally christened the Unmanned Vina 1,322-ton steel-hulled steamship designed for heavy cargo. After the First World War, she was transferred to the Hudson's Bay Company, renamed the Baichimo, and put to work along the Arctic coastline of Canada. Her purpose was trade, ferrying supplies and furs between remote outposts scattered along the northern coast, from Vancouver to the isolated settlements of Victoria Island and beyond. It was grueling, dangerous work. The Arctic shipping season was brutally short, a narrow window of navigable water between the summer thaw and the autumn freeze. Captains who ran these routes understood that the margin for error was measured in days, sometimes hours. Miss the window, and the ice would find you. For nearly a decade, Captain Sidney Cornwell commanded the Baichimo through these waters. He knew her intimately, every sound her hull made under strain, every shudder of her steam engine in heavy seas. Under his command, the ship completed voyage after voyage, threading the needle between the Arctic's brief generosity and its long, crushing winters. In the autumn of 1931, that needle closed. The Baichimo departed Vancouver in July of that year on what should have been a routine trading run along the western Arctic coast. The voyage north proceeded without incident. The ship collected furs from remote outposts, her hold filling steadily. But as September turned to October, the weather shifted with abnormal speed. Winter arrived weeks ahead of schedule, and the ice came with it. By early October, the Baichimo was fighting for every mile. Pack ice pressed against her hull, slowing her progress to a crawl. Then, on October 1st, the ice won. The ship became locked in place, seized by a frozen vise off the coast near Barrow, Alaska, then a small, remote settlement at the northernmost edge of the continent. She could not move forward. She could not turn back. The Arctic had her. For days the crew waited, hoping for a shift in wind or current that might loosen the ice. None came. The pressure against the hull grew steadily, the steel groaning under forces it was never designed to withstand for prolonged periods. The temperature continued to drop. Captain Cornwell faced a decision no captain wants to make. The ship could hold for now, but if the ice intensified, and every sign suggested it would, the hull could buckle. The crew's safety had to come first. He ordered the evacuation. The crew gathered what supplies they could carry and began a half-mile trek across the frozen landscape to Barrow. The conditions were severe, biting wind, limited visibility, temperatures well below zero, but they made it. The residents of Barrow, accustomed to the Arctic's capacity for straining travelers, took the crew in. Cornwell and his men settled in to wait, watching the horizon, hoping the ice would release the Baichimo before it destroyed her. The Hudson's Bay Company, upon learning of the situation, arranged for aircraft to evacuate most of the crew. But Cornwell and a small group of volunteers, roughly 15 men, chose to stay behind, unwilling to abandon the ship and her valuable cargo of furs. They constructed a makeshift shelter on the ice within sight of the Baichimo, enduring conditions that tested the limits of human endurance and waited for the ice to break. On November 24th, a blizzard struck with extraordinary violence. For days, the wind screamed across the ice, reducing visibility to nothing. Cornwell and his men huddled in their shelter, unable to see the ship, unable to do anything but survive. When the storm finally broke, they emerged and looked toward where the Baichimo had been. She was gone. The men stood in silence, scanning an expanse of fractured, rearranged ice that stretched to the horizon. There was no ship, there was no wreckage, no shattered timber, no scattered cargo, no oil slick, nothing to suggest the Baichimo had been crushed and sunk. She had simply vanished. Cornwell searched the area methodically. The conclusion was inescapable. The storm had broken the ice formation that held the ship, and the Baichimo had drifted free. But in which direction, and in what condition, was impossible to know. for all practical purposes, the ship was lost. Then, days later, a piece of unexpected news arrived. An Inuit seal hunter traveling through the region reported seeing a large steel ship roughly 45 miles to the southwest, drifting among the ice floes. It matched the Beichimo's description. Cornwell organized a small team and set out immediately. The journey across the ice was arduous, but when they crested a pressure ridge and saw the Beichimo sitting low in the water, listing but afloat, the effort felt justified. She had survived the storm. The relief, however, was short-lived. Upon reaching the ship, Cornwell found her in dire condition. The hull had sustained significant damage cracks, ran along the waterline. Ice had invaded sections of the deck, and the ship sat noticeably lower than she should have. She was taking on water, slowly but steadily. In Cornwell's experienced judgment, the Beichimo was no longer seaworthy. She would not survive another voyage. He made the call to salvage what they could. The crew worked quickly, removing the most valuable cargo, primarily furs, from the hold. When the last accessible crate had been hauled off, Cornwell took a final walk across the deck of the ship he had commanded for nearly 10 years. Then he left her. The expectation was straightforward. The Beichimo, compromised and abandoned in the Arctic Ocean as winter deepened, would sink. It was not a question of whether, but when. The Hudson's Bay Company formally listed her as a loss. Cornwell returned to his career, commanding other vessels, carrying the weight of a ship he'd been forced to leave behind. The Beichimo, however, did not sink. Within months, reports began filtering in from sailors, whalers, and traders working the Arctic waters. A large steel ship had been spotted drifting, unmanned, far from where she had been abandoned. The descriptions matched a Beichimo her profile, her markings, her unmistakable silhouette. At first, the reports were easy to dismiss. The Arctic played tricks on the eyes. Exhaustion, isolation, and the disorienting effect of endless ice could make a man see things that weren't there. But the sightings didn't stop. They came from different crews, at different times, in different locations. And they all described the same thing: a steel-hulled cargo ship, visibly damaged, with no one aboard, drifting through the ice as though guided by some invisible hand. In March of 1932, less than a year after the abandonment, a dog-sled team encountered the Beichimo embedded in ice approximately 250 miles from her last known position. She had traveled a remarkable distance for a dead ship. They observed her but did not board. In 1933, a group of Inuit hunters managed what no one else had. They briefly set foot on the Beichimo's deck. They explored what they could before deteriorating conditions forced them to leave. The ship, they reported, was battered but intact. Her cargo holds were largely empty, stripped during Cornwell's final salvage, but the vessel herself endured. Over the following years, the pattern repeated with an almost rhythmic consistency. The Beichimo would appear, usually spotted by chance by a whaling crew scanning the horizon, by a supply ship navigating between settlements, by hunters traveling across the ice. Attempts to reach her, board her, or tow her to port were made on multiple occasions. Each attempt failed. Sometimes the weather turned without warning, driving would-be salvagers back. Sometimes shifting ice made approach impossible. Sometimes the ship simply drifted out of reach before anyone could close the distance, carried by currents that seemed to favor her solitude. By the mid-1930s, the Beichimo had earned a name in maritime circles that no ship's captain would want. She was called a ghost ship, not because anyone genuinely believed in the supernatural, though some sailors, the superstitious sort, were not entirely sure, but because her behavior defied rational expectation. Damaged ships sink. Abandoned ships deteriorate and break apart. They do not wander the ocean for years on end, appearing and disappearing like something out of a mariner's fever dream. Yet that is precisely what the Beichimo did. In 1939, a crew made a determined attempt to board and salvage the vessel. They located her, approached her, and were driven back by conditions before they could secure a tow line. The opportunity passed, and the Beichimo slipped away again. The Second World War redirected the world's attention, and for a time, the ghost ship of the Arctic faded from public consciousness. But she didn't stop moving. Sporadic sightings continued through the 1940s and 1950s, reported by military patrols, fishing vessels, and Arctic researchers. The Beichimo had become a permanent fixture of the northern seas, not quite real, not quite imaginary, always somewhere just beyond confirmation. By 1962, More than 30 years had passed since Captain Cornwell walked off her deck for the last time. A group of Inuits spotted the ship along the Beaufort Sea coastline. She was still afloat, still unmanned, still drifting. Then, in 1969, 38 years after her abandonment, the Bechimo was seen for what would be the final time. A group of Inuit hunters observed her drifting through icy waters between Point Barrow and Icy Cape. She moved silently through the frozen seascape, her steel hull corroded and weather-beaten, but unbroken. No crew, no signs of life, just the ship, alone, still refusing to go down. After 1969, the sightings stopped. The silence was, in its own way, as mysterious as the decades of wandering that preceded it. Had the Bechimo finally succumbed to the accumulated damage of nearly 4 decades of uncrewed Arctic exposure? Had she slipped beneath the ice during some unwitnessed storm, settling at last onto the ocean floor? Or was she still out there, drifting in some remote corridor of the Arctic where no human eyes could find her? The question attracted serious attention. In 2006, the Alaska state government launched an initiative to locate the Bechimo, recognizing the vessel as a historically significant artifact. Efforts were organized to search the areas where she had last been reported, employing modern technology sonar, satellite imaging, aerial surveys to scan vast stretches of Arctic water and seabed. The searches found nothing. As of today, the final resting place of the SS Bechimo remains unknown. No wreckage has been identified on the ocean floor. No debris has washed ashore. No definitive evidence has emerged to confirm whether the ship sank, broke apart, or became permanently trapped in ice. She is, in the most literal sense, still missing. The question of how the Bechimo survived as long as she did is not entirely without explanation, though no single answer fully satisfies. Several factors likely contributed to her extraordinary endurance. First, the Arctic cold itself. The near-freezing water temperatures would have dramatically slowed the biological and chemical processes that normally destroy a ship: wood rot, rust, and marine growth. The forces that devour abandoned vessels in warmer waters would have been significantly retarded in the Arctic environment. The cold, paradoxically, preserved the ship that it had originally trapped. Second, the ice. While ice was the force that damaged the Bechimo and drove her crew away, it may also have been what kept her afloat. Pack ice forming around and beneath the hull could have acted as a kind of structural support, sealing cracks and providing buoyancy that the compromised hull alone could no longer maintain. The ship and the ice may have reached a kind of equilibrium, the ice slowly destroying her even as it held her together. Third, the Bechimo was well built. A 1,322-ton steel-hulled steamship constructed in a Scandinavian shipyard was designed to withstand harsh conditions. Her structural integrity, even after significant damage, was evidently sufficient to keep her above water far longer than anyone predicted. But explanations only go so far. The sheer duration of her drift, 38 years of confirmed sightings, and her repeated ability to evade capture remain remarkable by any standard. Ships do not typically behave this way. The Bechimo is, to this day, one of the longest-lived ghost ships in recorded maritime history. Captain Sidney Cornwell lived long enough to hear many of the reports about his former command. One can only imagine what he felt, learning again and again that the ship he had abandoned to certain destruction was still out there, wandering the same waters he had once navigated at her helm. He had left her expecting a burial at sea. Instead, she outlasted his career, his expectations, and very nearly his lifetime. The Bechimo's story endures because it touches something fundamental about our relationship with the sea. We build ships to master the ocean, to impose human will on an environment that does not recognize human authority. The Bechimo reversed that equation. Freed from human control, she became something else. Not quite a ship anymore, not quite wreckage, but something in between. A vessel with no destination, no purpose, and no crew, moving through the Arctic on terms dictated entirely by wind, current, and ice. She may be resting on the ocean floor now, her steel bones slowly dissolving into the sediment. She may be locked in ice somewhere in the vast, uncharted spaces of the Arctic, preserved and waiting. We simply do not know, and that perhaps is the most fitting ending for a ghost ship. Not a discovery, not a resolution, but a question still open, still unanswered, still drifting somewhere in the cold. What do you think happened to the Bechamel? Is she resting on the Arctic seabed, or could she still be out there, locked in ice, waiting to be found? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, thanks for joining us on this journey into one of the sea's most enduring mysteries.